So as always, if you have any questions or anything that you would like addressed in the class tonight, feel free to put it in the chat. And otherwise, we'll just work with what's in front of us. So take a deep breath and just kind of bring yourself into this moment. Let yourself arrive. How quickly can you just let go of all the stories you've been swimming in to show up for this moment right now? For most people, they have to let go a little, then a little more with each breath. Recognize a story they're in and put it down. But you get to a point where you just step out of the false you and step into the real moment. And there doesn't have to be a process to it. People lead people to think that awakening has to take 20 years, 40 years. The truth is, it doesn't take time at all. Time's not even part of that equation. It happens the moment you choose to let go of the story and just show up cleanly for this moment. It comes when you enter this moment, this reality, with complete abandon. And stay there. The second you do that, a process begins of flooding energy into your body. And at a certain point, everything just opens up. That point's different for everybody. How long can you be in that space? Being in that space is not a rigid holding, it's a letting go into. Surrender, I guess, to use the tritest word in the world. Hang on, let me. That moment where you just let go of everything else and just sit here wide open. You can do that now if you want. Do that now and see how long, how many breaths can you spend in that space? The only thing pulling against it is you. What if in this moment you stopped fighting yourself? I know you have difficulties. I know there are unhealed things in your personal story. But that's the story. What if just for the moment you abandon all of it and show up for this clean moment? If for no other reason than to catch your breath. If for no other reason than to gain clarity before you step back into the story. You won't be able to heal the story. But you can spin around with it so much that you come to a point of acceptance where you can let go of it legitimately. We're not talking about suppression. We're talking about recognizing that it doesn't necessarily need to be healed. It's not who you are. It just needs to find enough of a balance that it doesn't constantly tug on you. But to try and find that answer while you're spinning around in the story is the least efficient way to get there. Better is to step out, regain your sanity, open yourself back up, because it's safe to. In this state, it's safe to open. And then from that clarity, you step back into the story and just make some sober decisions. But it's not going to be healed, because it's the nature of the personality to be incomplete and feeling like it's lacking something. It's the nature of the personality to suffer, to reject this moment and reach towards another. Don't take my word for that. Just watch your life. You'll see it. Every up in the personality is an effort to get away from the down. And it lasts such a short amount of time. And the higher up you swing, the harder you crash down. And there isn't really any stability until you no longer need the upswing. It's the trick of it all. You have to no longer avoid the downswing to find a stable place above it. Why? Because the personality deals in opposites. It's dual. So the very thing that you're running away from is the thing you're always kind of running towards. You run away from a bad feeling by upswinging yourself into a good feeling, and it becomes so much of itself that it collapses in on itself, and you're back at the bad feeling. It's yin and yang. Yang is this projective force that becomes more of itself. And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until it just starts to get too heavy. And then it collapses in on itself and becomes yin, 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 composting itself, composting itself, composting itself. And from the center of all that soil, the next yang cycle comes forward. And in the world of the personality, that just goes on forever. You can't escape it. The freedom doesn't come in escaping it. The freedom comes in not asking it to be any different than it is. Not insisting that it be something different. So that you can stand wide open and present while it's happening. When you do that, that yin and yang cycle actually finds balance. It doesn't stop happening, but instead of a wave that comes crashing down, crashing down, crashing down, it steadies out. Why? Because you're not adding anything to it through your resistance. You're not pushing it or pulling it in any way. You become balanced the way nature is balanced. Nature is also part of the dual world. It lives in yin and yang. But the aspects of nature that are not dominated by sentient consciousness are quite stable. They fluctuate, but it's different. You can feel it when you walk out into a forest. It's dynamic, it's alive. But it's mostly not a horror story, unless it's being affected by us in some way. In Buddhism, that's called the natural state. Meditation is the natural state. And that's what that means. It's less something you do and more about what you stop doing. And in that balance, that dynamic, fluctuating balance, because you don't have something always pulling you, you can go deeper and deeper and deeper into the silence that overlays all of it. That world that you taste in these classes becomes a vast realm that you can explore. Not like a three-dimensional realm, It's different. You have to experience it and sit with it to understand what I mean by that. Thing is, we're also here to evolve the story. So you will get thrown out of balance. Not a problem. You just rise to the occasion and rebalance yourself. You know, most people mourn that lack of balance, which is probably the most useless thing you can do. Life has to get thrown out of balance in order to evolve. Stability is very comfortable, but it can't really grow. And so sometimes you have to kind of break things. Life has to break things. Break that balance, break that stability, that new normal, that new status quo. Because in doing that, you get different little pockets of stability that form. But they form differently. And so when the whole thing comes back in balance, it comes back in balance at a higher level. So it's this dichotomy between a story world that you came here to be subjected to, and reality, which is always influencing things back towards a state of balance. If you only had the balance, you wouldn't grow. You wouldn't expand. You wouldn't even appreciate it. So you have to become a master of balance, but that doesn't mean you won't lose it. Mastering balance is about how you deal with imbalance. And everything you learn on the way back into balance. You know, at the beginning of someone's spiritual journey, and for a lot of those early years, you're constantly falling down. But if you're dedicated, you're constantly getting back up. And that process of getting back up, getting back to your practice, stopping your indulgences and everything that takes you away from it, you learn so much from that rise back up to your level that even though the level you're trying to get back up to is somewhere you've been, you're actually beyond it when you get there because of everything you learned on the way back to it. You'll see it in time over and over again. Real awakening is not being upset over the instability. It's not being upset over the downswings. It's not being overly elated with the upswings. And that doesn't mean you don't feel anything. It just means you don't manipulate what's in front of you. The more you can do that, the more this dynamic story world that we're all a part of stops looking like something that's victimizing you, and you start to just recognize that there are currents and tides that are kind of set up in this world for the purpose of knocking you off your perch and strengthening your wings. They're there to give you something to balance yourself against. Before you get there, it all feels like life is happening to you. But in a way, life is happening for you. Not you as an individual, but you as consciousness. The you that is the same you in you as it is in me and anyone else. Your trek to balance. It becomes like a cork's trek to the top of the surface of the water. It's just always kind of heading back in that direction. A wave can come over it and it can go down for a second, but it's always on its way back up. After a certain point in your training, when you've just seen it over and over and over again, you reach this place where you are always heading back to a balanced state. You're also waking up to your desire to be of service to the world around you. And so you take on more challenges. So you may even spend more time with your head under the water, but you're always floating back to the surface. It's the fundamental difference, I think, between someone who's awake and someone who's asleep. Less about where you are and more about where you're heading. There are teachers who attain their awakening on the top of a mountain with no real challenges around them. And then when they come down the mountain, they can't sustain anything. They have this fundamental knowledge of what things look like in the reality of life, and maybe even some power. But the way in which they deal with their students and the people around them is just filled with unlearned lessons, keeping things out of balance. Hang on, I just saw something in the chat. Joanna's asking, hi Liam, do you have any insights or tips on quantum jumping? Do you believe in that? Sorry if I got off topic, maybe for another time, just throwing it out there. Joanna, describe quantum jumping to me. What do you consider quantum jumping to be? You can type it or say it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, it's okay. All topics are ultimately the same. So what she's talking about is, in some of the circles of manifestation, one of the frameworks in which they look at it is this idea that, according to quantum mechanics, there are multiple timelines, that anything you could ever be or do is happening in some alternate timeline. And that one of the ways that you can jump a timeline is to actually, in an instant, shift your focus and become someone who can do that. And then suddenly that timeline is this timeline. There are many ways to conceptualize that. I think quantum jumping is a fun way to conceptualize that. Generally, the way I teach that is that the power of your attention can take you anywhere you need to go. Consciousness is capable of becoming anything, and consciousness shapes itself according to the habitual placements in your attention. So, in order to change your future, in a way, you have to change your past. Your past is something that lives in you right now. We think of it as something that is ingrained indelibly into this timeline. But in my experience, the reality is that past stops existing when you can 100% release it. What do I mean when I say that? This is a story I've told before. I think the first time I learned that was when I was on my monastery, and there was another student there who was further down the road than I was spiritually, at least in her initiations. And she was someone who had a lot of hang-ups, and specifically about me. She thought I was a threat to her in some way. And so she was always just getting in my way and trying to lower people's perceptions of me, and always had her voice in my teacher's ear, trying to just make sure that I don't ever become someone who is trusted. And, and I was aware of this, and people would tell me about it a lot, because they would hear it. And so there was this constant sort of just thing in the space. You could always sort of feel it. But I was, meditating 4 hours a day. I was very, very focused on my spiritual life. And, I was not at a place where I could let go of what she did to me. We had this relationship. It was what it was. I wasn't going to pretend it was something different. And then one morning I was sitting in meditation, and in an instant it disappeared. It fell off of me. It's not that I couldn't remember it. It's that nothing in me took me there. Like, it was difficult to even access it, and it didn't have any charge around it, and you could barely see it. It was like everything just became fuzzy and black and white around our storyline. And I felt no anger towards her. I felt no resentment towards her. Nothing at all. I didn't feel threatened by her. It's quite a thing to have someone gunning for the most important thing in your life. And it was just gone. And I was awake enough to be aware that that had happened. And what I found out was that she had taken this major step forward in that moment. She had literally stepped into a different level of consciousness through her own practice. And she was a different person. And I could tell you the exact moment it happened. And so none of that existed between us anymore. It was just a non-issue. It didn't matter in any way. It's not that nobody could remember it, but nobody would remember it because it wasn't there for them to store. She had removed her past. I can also tell you the moment that she slipped back because it all came screaming back in. A lot of times those steps that we take, they don't last forever. You make some headway and fall back a little and make some headway and fall back a little. But I learned in that moment that the past is about as malleable as the future. And that is not the same as just saying something didn't happen. It is a magic of life that only happens in the now. The power to do that is only now. And it's an ability to just let go of the story and shift your focus to something else. The thing is, a lot of times you can't do that if life doesn't ask it of you in some way. How does life ask it of you? It makes you suffer. It necessitates it. It throws everything out of balance. It brings somebody into your life that, the anger you feel towards them makes your life so miserable that there's impetus to actually let go of it. If that ugliness didn't exist, that moment of beauty wouldn't exist. It wouldn't have any meaning. It wouldn't even be palpable. We get so used to things so fast. Think about like a buzzing noise in your house or something that's always there. People come into your home and they're like, what's that noise? But for you, you don't even hear it anymore. Or an odor. You have to have that contrast in order to even recognize any of it. If you don't have that contrast, life is still working the same way life works. But there's no way for you to study it. There's no way for you to know it. Which means there's no way for you to act on anything. Which means you're always vulnerable. So I think that would be how I would talk about a quantum timeline. And it's not just something you step into. when you step into it, the world changes around you. In lesser ways, when I used to teach this class at the library and I had a few librarians coming, they would invariably talk about how it's not just that they feel different, they notice that the customers that come to them are different. And you can look at that like, well, the customers are noting a different energy from you, and so they're responding differently. Quantum mechanics would imply that there's another world where you didn't do that. I don't know. I've seen some evidence of other worlds. I think what matters most is not which story is true. I think what matters most is not whether that explanation is the true explanation. I don't think any explanations are true explanations. I don't think words can get you to truth. I think the question is, does that explanation function for you? Does that explanation give you the ability to make choices in your life that take you into a place of dynamic balance and strengthen you so that when you get thrown out, that your natural inclination is just to keep moving towards it? We're experiencing this world with 5 senses. We talk about a 6th sense, but really that 6th sense is just a deep way to use the 5 senses. The imagination is an interface that you can use to deal with what's actually out there. But the actual truth of what's out there, I don't know that anybody can see that. What they can see is if their current theorizing of how it works allows them to do things. Does shifting your attention from the story that is problematic change your perception of the story's presence in your life? And does that spread to the other people that were connected? And if it does, then that's something that works. I think the quantum jumping, what's nice about it is that it's exciting to people. I think it stimulates people to take their mind in hand and make some choices for their attention. So I'm all for anything that does that. Any other questions? If not, I think let's spend some time in the silence. Wide awake, open, but just given to the silent stillness of this moment. What if you just went ahead and let yourself be comfortable? Comfortable means you accept everything exactly as it is. The time will come to act on things, but this isn't that moment. This moment is the fertile baseline. This moment is actually the hinge between the worlds, the hinge between any story you could want to step into. If you've had a terrible day, this could be the moment, the hinge into a night of good feelings, into a beautiful walk that feels like a vacation. Into comfortable, fearless intimacy with your spouse. Into organizing your week to plan productivity and success. Or you can let the past just creep back up and put images on the screen of your mind to pull you right back to where you were. The point is, the choice is yours. This moment gives you choice. Not free will so much, because you don't really get to decide what you like and what moves you at a deep level. But choice to untangle yourself from the things you've been stuck in, to let them go and step into a new day. But you have to choose it. And this moment is always available to you. The more time you spend here, the easier it is to get back here. Even when things are falling down. Give yourself that gift. And if you don't give yourself that gift, wonder why. I know that it's true. I know you can feel it. if you can't make yourself step into it, wonder why. Care enough to question yourself. Every day you spend living like that changes your trajectory. It changes where you end up down the road. You know what works. But one of the biggest steps for any spiritual aspirant is, after understanding how it works and cultivating the skill, which I'm pretty sure everyone here has cultivated, the next big step is using it, living it, not waiting for me to tell you. But if you're not ready to do that, at the very least, wonder why. Come to understand what you're afraid of. It all just happens in a moment. It could just be the way you spend the next 30 minutes. You don't have to plan your whole life. What if in the next 30 minutes you released the old story and stepped into something beautiful? Where you pull what's beautiful about the space you're in and the people you're with out of the woodwork just through your attention, just through your assumption, that silent assumption that everything is good. Assumption is a powerful, powerful skill. For most people, it wields them. What if you wielded it? Not forever. Just for the 30 minutes after we get off this Zoom meeting. Just so you've done it and can maybe try it again tomorrow. And if not, why? All right, everybody. I'm going to let you get back to your night, and I will be here again next Thursday. Take care. Thank you for. You too.